Okay, so it's 8:05, so we're gonna get started. A few things to note. So we're gonna start with the sort of a presentation. The goal of this seminar is really to sort of
So hard not to.
Isaac, I think you might be unmuted. Perfect. Okay, so the goal of the seminar is really just to sort of teach you guys how to work at getting better at debate, especially if maybe you don't have a lot of institutional support, if maybe you're just training on your own or with your partner, and how you can sort of do your best to learn from the good feedback that you do get, but also, do some practicing on your own to hopefully improve. So I'm going to just share my screen. Diggory made us a very nice presentation. Can everybody see this? Going to take that for yes. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few things. Specifically, what your expectations should be in terms of sort of improving at debate, how to deliver things better, focusing on like a little bit of style, some strategic things that you can do to improve your chances, team dynamics, and then what to do if you encounter bad judging, because I think that's a common problem that people often have. So starting with expectations, I think first of all, it's important to be a little bit realistic in terms of how rapidly you're going to improve. You're going to probably need to put a lot of time into it if you want to improve at debate. And I think this is particularly true if you've sort of reached the point where you're reasonably good at debate, you know the basic rules, you know how things work, and you're aiming to get better. When you first start out at debate, there is a pretty rapid learning curve, which happens when you don't know anything about VP, maybe don't manage to speak for your full 5 minutes or whatever. And the time it takes to get from being an absolute beginner to being like a relatively okay debater is usually quite short, maybe a couple of months, because it's relatively easy in that time to learn how to say enough things to fill your time and like find out how the format works. So the problem then is that often once you sort of reach that mid-tier, you sort of plateau and you feel like you're not improving anymore. And that's really frustrating because obviously everybody wants to get better, and it can be kind of discouraging if you feel like you aren't. The thing to remember though is I think that any kind of improvement is often not going to be completely linear. So you're going to sometimes have a good round, a bad round. You might even have a good or a bad tournament. And so sometimes if you just look at like, how did I do this weekend versus how did I do last weekend, you might sometimes feel like you're not improving or even that you're getting worse. But I think it's important to sort of keep in mind the big picture and to look at how am I doing today versus how did I do a year ago. And for example, like I went to Hard House this weekend, I did not break, which is very unfortunate, but I still did much better than I did last year. And so things like that, I think, can help to put things in perspective, even if, maybe you didn't have your best tournament or whatever. So the next thing then I think is to set realistic goals. So you want to think about what you're aiming for and sort of how you can get there. So you're probably not going to start out averaging like a 75 or 76 and then average an 80 at the end of the month, unless you go to a tournament with really high stakes or anything. This is probably an unrealistic expectation to set for yourself. But I think there are a lot of more realistic goals that you can set that will sort of help you to keep motivated as you improve at debate, and also give you something to aim for. So a few examples, I think it can be useful to aim to maybe get your highest speaker score. So, I want to speak an 82, I want to speak an 85, I want to speak an 80, whatever that looks like to you. Because that's a goal that I think can mean a lot to you personally, but also isn't too hard to achieve, because it doesn't mean that you have to like have an incredible speech 5 rounds in a row. It's something that you can do just once. That's going to give you a good confidence boost. And I think it's kind of fun to track like how you're doing over time. And so that's one type of thing you can aim for. I think that, you could maybe aim to move up like one speaker score on average every like few months. Obviously, I think that's a little bit more difficult to track because averages vary a lot, which is why I sometimes aim for like a personal best. But something like that can be quite good. If you're struggling a lot at tournaments and taking a lot of 4s, you could aim to maybe have one tournament where you just don't take any 4s, and maybe you change your strategy a little bit. You focus on refuting one team so that you at least get 3. But I think sort of setting goals in that range that maybe don't have to do as much with like breaking at a tournament as they do with your own sort of personal progress can be really helpful. And there are also goals that I think you're much more likely to consistently achieve and sort of see progress in. You also, yeah, like it says here, like you're likely going to have some tournaments that are just not going to go that well for you. It happens to everyone. Maybe you didn't get a good sleep. Maybe it's like a really difficult motion. Maybe it's just something you've never heard of before. It happens to everyone. I think the key takeaway is don't get discouraged when you're having a bad tournament, and try to sort of keep a big picture perspective on all of this. I think debate progress often comes in sort of bursts and starts. Like often you will improve quite rapidly, then you'll plateau for a while, and then suddenly something clicks and you improve pretty quickly again, and then you plateau again. This is not uncommon. So if you feel like that's happening to you, don't be frustrated. I think keep working at it, keep setting sort of smaller goals along the way. And when you finally do hit that period of sort of rapid growth, take advantage of it, do a lot of practice debates while you feel like you're improving rapidly. And hopefully that'll help you to improve. So having then talked about like what to expect, how do you actually get better? The first thing is to focus on style and delivery. And I think that especially if you're maybe a stronger debater, maybe you're averaging like, I don't know, 78, something like that at tournaments, you're probably quite a good speaker. You maybe often have good analysis, but you probably struggle to get those sort of like, low to mid 80s, even high 80s scores, just because there's something missing from your speech. And I think that often that element is style. Because style can sometimes be the thing that makes your argument come across a little bit more clearly. It can help you to sound more confident. If you say something and you just sound really sure what you're saying, often your judges are going to credit that much more than they'll credit your opponent's material, even if perhaps they're both equally true. I think there's sort of an implicit inclination to credit things that sound more confident. And if you get a weaker judge, sometimes they will also explicitly credit that. So delivery style can be quite important. Things like humor, I think, can help to keep your panel engaged, for example. But so can, being serious, sort of painting a picture with your words, all those kinds of things. So a few things that you can do then to work on your style. Firstly, record your speeches. This is something that hopefully you should be doing pretty much anytime you give a speech in like a semi-competitive setting. If you're at practice or on your own and trying to practice, or at a tournament, try to record every speech that you give and then listen to it again later. And I think that that's going to do two things. Firstly, it helps you to sort of give yourself feedback on your speech. So you can say like, wow, this was really, unclear, or I really didn't recognize that as much as I should have. I also think, though, it can be a good benchmark for you, because if you record a speech and then a year later you look back on it, it's going to be easy for you to tell how much you've improved. And that's the kind of thing that I think can also be quite encouraging, especially if you don't have a ton of external feedback to sort of tell you that. Is just looking at how you're doing on your own is going to hopefully make that better for you. So ask yourself questions, where was I unclear? Where was I assertive? How can I make this better? How can I make it more concise? You can do drills. You can then try to give your speech again in fewer minutes than you had during the debate. So if it's a 5-minute speech, try to give the same speech in 4 minutes and see like what extraneous material you can cut out. Maybe speak a little bit more quickly or make things a little bit clearer. Maybe you integrate your reputation this time. Things like that, I think, can help you to increase the density of content in your speeches, which is usually also going to increase your style, since you're spending less time on sort of filler material, and also your substance, because you now have more time for substantive things. If you're getting an OA, you can also then compare the feedback you get from judges to the feedback you have for yourself. This can also be useful in terms of getting better as a judge, because you can say, wow, I really didn't think that I was unclear there. And, maybe I should notice that. Maybe this is what people find unclear. Maybe they don't know what this word means. And so being able to, I think, compare your feedback to other people's feedback can also be helpful, because it can maybe point out some of your blind spots for you. You can also send people your speeches for more concrete advice. This is particularly true if you're not doing them at a tournament. Maybe you're not getting external feedback anyways. A lot of people maybe will have a coach or a teacher, or even like someone who doesn't do debate, like a parent or someone who might be willing to take 5 minutes and listen to your speech. And I think even a layperson's opinion of like, was this speech interesting? Did I learn something? Was I persuaded? Can be quite helpful, because they're often going to be more persuaded by things like style. And so often a good way to practice that can be just, seeing how your family reacts to different arguments and stuff. A lot of judges are also sometimes a little bit hesitant to give explicit feedback on style unless they're prompted. I think largely because, no one wants to stray into like sort of discriminatory territory of saying like, I didn't give you a lot of speaker points because you have an accent or whatever. So I think often judges will be hesitant to say those things to you, even if perhaps they do have like unrelated but useful style feedback for you. So if you are wondering about your style and trying to work on that, approach your panelists, approach your judge, and see if you can ask them, how was my style? Is there anything I could do better? Maybe they're going to have suggestions for you. There are also, I think, crucially, a lot of ways to be good at style. Having good style doesn't necessarily mean that you need to like speak English incredibly well. There are lots of ESL speakers that have excellent style. Maybe for you, good style means like speaking very slowly and clearly and like really getting your point across with very efficient language. Maybe it means using lots of like big words to sound smart. Maybe it means cracking jokes. There are lots of different ways. I think do what feels natural. When you try to do something that isn't very intuitive to you, I think often that manages to come across. And it might sound, a little bit fake. If you're trying to be really serious about something and you just can't, like maybe it is better to just make a joke about it if that's easier for you. And vice versa, like if you're debating a motion about genocide or something, don't come out there and like start off your prime minister's speech with a joke. There are definitely times and places for those types of things. Okay, so a few more delivery suggestions. When you're doing practices or spars, try to focus on one thing at a time. So maybe say like, this time I'm gonna make 3 jokes in my speech, or I'm going to try to speak really clearly. I'm not going to use the word like at all, something like that. And try to focus on that. Obviously, in a tournament, you're probably not going to want to do that because you're focusing on trying to win. But at practice, it really is practice. Your goal should be to sort of try out new things in a very low stakes environment. So if you are trying to improve your style, that's something that you can try doing. And you can, of course, do this with things other than style and delivery. If your weighing is weak, focus on weighing at practice. If you're struggling with mechanization, focus on mechanizing something. If I want to practice mechanization, sometimes I like to run a very ridiculous case and mechanize it as well as I can. So you can run like the communist extension or something on a motion and just spend your whole speech mechanizing why communism is bad, or run like the aliens extension and mechanize why it's actually incredibly likely that aliens exist. Something like that, I think, can make it a little bit more engaging and also, maybe lower the stakes for you as well, because you don't feel like you're, going to be embarrassed if you lose at the very difficult case. But do try to sort of focus on 1 or 2 things at a time to improve. Debate with new people. I think this is useful. Speak in different positions. I think also judging occasionally can be quite helpful because it shows you what judges look for, maybe things that other people do in their speeches that you notice that you do as well that you can improve. I think all of this gives you a new perspective that will make you better at the position that you usually speak or with the partner that you usually debate with. And then, like I said before, sometimes you can give a speech again. You can repeat a speech if you maybe recorded it, weren't very happy with it. See if you can go back, re-record that, and give a better job than you did the first time and see what the difference is there. Okay, so then strategy. So it's a little bit difficult to sort of just know immediately what the right arguments are to make. I think this is particularly true when you're in high school and maybe you haven't had the experience of like living on your own yet. You probably haven't had to like pay rent to go grocery shopping. About that. My laptop died, unfortunately, but fortunately it is back. I'm gonna just reshare my screen. Okay, so how do you run the right arguments? I think I was just saying it can be a little bit difficult sometimes to know exactly what the right case is, especially if maybe it's an area that you don't have a lot of personal experience with. And I think often, especially high school students, sometimes feel a little bit limited to running arguments that maybe they do have some of that personal experience with. So I find sometimes people will tend to focus on like, how does this impact children? How does this impact the education system? Things like that. Or even like, how does this impact the developed world as opposed to the developing world? So I would encourage you to sort of, if you notice you have sort of biases like that or arguments that you tend to want to run, just double check, like, is this really maybe representative of everywhere that the motion takes place or the most important situations? If so, then run with it. But if not, see if you can consider some of those other situations. That said, generally, it is difficult to know exactly what to run. A lot of the time, it does just come with experience to sort of be able to say, okay, this is probably the main clash in the debate. This is where I think it's going to head. But there are ways to work on this. So you can always watch lots of debates online on YouTube. Most of the ones available, I think, are university tournaments. This is largely just because of like confidentiality issues if you're recording high school students. So the main difference I think is just that the speeches are going to be 7 minutes instead of 5, and you will sometimes see a little bit of coarse language in there. But assuming that that's not a concern, they're a really great resource, and you're going to see some of the top debaters in the world debating some really challenging and quite interesting motions. But you can also watch out rounds if you're at a tournament. And I think this is a really good way to get better because it shows you sort of what people maybe that you've debated against or that you're likely to encounter at tournaments are going to run in a good motion. You can find out the results pretty much right away. You're going to know who advances. That tells you which arguments were persuasive or best mechanized or whatever. And it's also just like a fun experience. If you have friends in the tournament or whatever, you get to cheer them on. Also, out rounds often have different types of motions than the ones that you'll see in rounds. They're often a little bit more difficult, a little more fun to watch for a crowd. And that I think is good experience to get as well, because the first time that you break, you're maybe going to encounter a new type of motion that you haven't seen before. And if you're not expecting that, or you don't know how to debate that because you've never seen it done before, you're not going to do as well as you would if you've gotten a lot of experience by watching these out rounds. Yeah, when you see out rounds, ask yourself, why is this the case that they're running? What would I run if I were in this case? What would I respond with? How would I weigh things? Ask yourself those questions. And sometimes people in out rounds aren't necessarily going to run things perfectly. Sometimes they do maybe miss the right case or miss a couple of key mechanisms. But it can be useful, I think, to take a look at how good debaters are running things and what they think is important and compare that to maybe what your intuition is. Yeah, and then also I think, so compare your strategy with that of the teams in the round. I think also compare your call with that of the teams in the round, like say, who do I think is advancing out of this debate? See if you're right. If not, you can always even ask like the panelists of an out round, like, hey, I really thought OG was going through. Why did you advance CG instead? And maybe they're going to tell you something interesting about debate. But I think any chance you get the opportunity to watch a spar or an out round or any kind of good debate, I would definitely do it because that can be quite helpful. Okay, so yeah, a few more things. I think people often ask judges what influenced their call, like, why did you make this call? Usually though, that's going to be something that the judge will probably already have told you in the RFD. So sometimes it can be useful to ask judges, what didn't influence their call? Like, was there anything I said that was just not very useful at all? Like, did I waste 2 minutes on this? Because sometimes you'll be surprised. And for example, if you have a debate and maybe government is proposing some kind of policy to address the environmental crisis, a common mistake I see people make is they will then spend a lot of time explaining why that's a valid goal. So they're going to say, it's really important that we address climate change because it's a threat to the world. And they spend a lot of time explaining this. And then opposition might stand up and say, we agree that climate change is a really big threat, but actually we're going to just solve it in a different way. And then 2 minutes of your speech has been rendered entirely useless by like one line from opposition. And so there's certain things like that that I think aren't going to factor into calls sometimes, but are going to waste a lot of your time. So if you talk to judges, they can help you to identify those, hopefully prevent you from making those mistakes in the future. And you can also ask then, if you needed to spend more time on something, what should I have given up in order to spend time on that? In the same vein, when you listen to your speeches, look for wasted time, and then try to cut that out, especially if you're like re-recording your speech or practicing again. See if you can maybe cut out that analysis that wasn't helpful, cut out that piece of extraneous refutation or whatever, and focus on the meat of your case instead. Okay. So we're going to talk next then about sort of team dynamics. And I think it's really important to remember that you win together as a team and you also lose together as a team. So often, especially if you're really new to debate, it sucks, but sometimes you just do badly at a tournament. This is particularly true of people who are just starting out, and then you turn on your partner. You say, you shouldn't have run that extension. You should have mechanized my arguments. You should have weighed this, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. Like, you win or you lose as a team. And I don't actually think it's true that one person will lose a debate for you. In a team, either person has the ability to propose ideas at prep, to mechanize things in the debate, to run it, rebuttal and refutation, and basically to fix any mistakes their partner has made. If you lose, you have lost together. If you win, that was also a team effort. So don't spend time criticizing each other. This will also just make you both sad. You're probably going to argue and be angry before you start your next round, which is not a good place to be. And I think that the frame of mind that you enter the tournament in is quite important. Like, if you go in, excited to have a fun time with your partner, you're probably going to do well. You're going to bounce ideas off each other in prep. If you criticize each other and shoot each other's ideas down, you're not as likely to propose good ideas. You're going to struggle. You're not going to do as well in the debate. And then you're going to blame each other afterwards. And it just becomes a cycle. So support each other, not just because it's going to make you better, but also just because I think it is objectively true that you win or you lose as a team. You want to talk about debates often after they happen to think about, what went wrong, what went right, but do it in a way that doesn't target your partner. So like, I think we should have ran this. I think we needed to spend more time on this. Perhaps we didn't use our prep time efficiently. Things like that, I think, are valid criticisms. Saying things like, you should have said this, you didn't listen to me, you didn't take notes well, that doesn't really help. And also, I think just talk to your partner in terms of how they like to behave at tournaments. Like, some people like to talk immediately after the round, speculate how it went. Do you think we took the first? Do we think before? Things like that. Some people enjoy that. Some people find it very stressful or just like are superstitious and don't want to jinx it. And so talk about that in advance with your partner, kind of plan in terms of how you think you want to deal with it if you don't do well, if you break, all those types of things, and then respect each other's boundaries. If you if you say, I really just don't want to talk about it after the round, let's like give me an hour to cool down and we can talk at lunch. Do that, find something that works for both of you. But I don't want either of you like imposing what you want on the other person. Conditioning I think also matters. Things like getting good sleep, drinking water, having a positive attitude, all of that can be really important. I mentioned that I didn't have a great tournament last weekend. I think a large part of that is because I was up really late on Friday night. So don't repeat my mistakes. Go get a good night's sleep. I think even just like getting up early, you can even do something like do a practice round like before the tournament starts. I know Diggory and I both sometimes do that, is you'll call up a friend before the tournament begins and just do a quick PMLO with them and like, get the jitters out, get some practice, make sure your voice is like not hoarse or anything, and just kind of get your head in the game a little bit. This is kind of like basic advice, but I think it works. One other comment as well on teamwork. I think the other important thing to remember is like, even if you are debating with a novice or a pro or whatever, like, don't be intimidated / underwhelmed by your partner. Like, I think you should treat each other as equals. If you're debating with a novice, sometimes there can be a temptation to like dictate the case to them in prep. If you're debating with a pro, there's a temptation to maybe just listen and not contribute that many ideas because you're scared of getting shot down. I don't think that's very productive. The whole reason that debate teams have two people is so you can come up with twice as many ideas. If one of you isn't contributing or you like talk over each other or whatever, you're just hurting yourselves because you then have fewer arguments to run. So I would definitely discourage that. Okay. Finally, then, we're going to just talk about how to deal with judges, especially if you maybe don't have excellent judges to deal with. This is particularly true in high school debate. Often you're going to get judged by parents, which are like the worst judges out there, or by teachers who are, I think, marginally better, or possibly high school debaters who are also sometimes good, but sometimes bad. And even at university tournaments, like often you're going to see only one judge in your room. And so there is a chance that you just do get a bad call. But basically, bad judges are a fact of life, and it is better to be able to sort of recognize how they sometimes judge, deal with that as best you can, as opposed to getting upset about it when you take it for. So how do you deal with that? The first thing to note, I think, is that even bad judges have reasons for being bad. Like, nobody's going to just give you a random call. They're probably going to have a justification for that, even if the justification is bad. So when you get a weird call, listen to the feedback and take note, because sometimes they're going to be consistently bad in certain ways. So sometimes bad judges will just consistently go for, speakers that sound really confident. They're going to be like, I love your confidence. A common one you'll get from parent judges is, I love your eye contact. And maybe that doesn't actually do anything really substantial for your speech, but it also doesn't really hurt you to try to do that. And so if you notice, well, this is the feedback that I'm consistently getting from people that I don't think of as very good judges, then that is something that you should start doing, because sounding confident isn't going to hurt. And if that's the difference between a 1 and a 2 with a judge that maybe doesn't have a ton of experience, that can be quite helpful. You can also sometimes, I think, kind of take advantage of having a bad judge, or at least a newer or less experienced judge. If you do things like tell them, hey, you should be judging this based on the metrics that I have given you to weigh my speech rather than your own intuition. Judges are, maybe more likely to buy that than not, especially if they know that there are certain rules about how to judge. If you explicitly tell them what those rules are and how they favor you, I think especially if you're dealing maybe with like a new panelist or something that wants something they can say to their chair during deliberation, if you can tell them that quite explicitly, they're going to repeat that to the chair. They're going to try to argue for you to take the one. So try to do things like that. I think a lot of bad judges will care about things like style, using examples, specific terminology. Sometimes you'll have judges that really like it if you use really specific econ language, or if they're, really new to debate or really into it, maybe they want to hear you say, this is a mechanism, rather than just saying like your mechanism without flagging it. So things like signposting can help, adding examples, being really clear, all of those types of things. The other thing I think is important to bear in mind is that you're also usually going to get roughly as many unfortunate calls that go your way as ones that go against you. So, I think there probably is a right call for most debates. And maybe your average judge is going to be slightly off of that. And sometimes you're going to get a really wrong call. But there is no real structural way in which they're likely to favor or disfavor you. So if you take an undeserved 4, you're probably also going to take an undeserved 1 at some point, and they tend to even out. So if you do have a very bad tournament or a bad round where you take a 4 or whatever, and you're feeling upset about it, sometimes it can help to think about like, hey, I've also taken some undeserved 1s. It kind of evens out. And then also like ask for personal feedback. Maybe the judges have some comments for you. If there are multiple people on the panel, you can maybe ask the other panelists if they agree with that, if they disagree. If a lot of people agree with a bad call, there is a possibility that maybe that is just the right call and you missed something important in the round. But if it was a messy round, if the panelists all have different opinions on things, then that can be an indication that like it was just a messy debate. Maybe they had to insert themselves more than they would have liked to. And unfortunately, that's the result. I think you can try to mitigate some of those like more sort of debate, like judge manual based bad calls by just being really explicit about things like weighing. So saying, this is our metric, this is why it's important, this is how we win on it. I think can make it clear to a judge who's maybe not very good at tracking, but understands the basic rules of debate, why it is that you're winning, and help to reduce a little bit of that randomness. Okay. So that's everything that we have for sort of the constructive portion of the seminar. I realize I'm now slipping into like debate terminology, but I think that's kind of the body of what we had to say. Diggory, was there anything I missed that you wanted to add?
Not really. I think everything is in the slides there.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll do questions now. I noticed there were a lot of questions that we got on the form, but before I get to those, I'll give everybody a chance to just sort of interrupt if you have any questions, maybe about the presentation or anything that you thought of while we were talking. Now is your chance, ask away. Okay, well, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I will address the ones then that, oh, I'm getting one now, I think. Define mechanizing and provide an example. Okay, so mechanizing is basically just like all the steps it takes to prove an argument. So usually people will come up with an argument and they're going to say something really broad, like this would be good for the economy. And they don't really sort of explain how that happens. Mechanizing is all of the steps along the way. So saying like, this will be good for the economy because I don't know, when we spend more money, people like, okay, let's say the government is spending money. They're like building a bridge. This is good for the economy because building a bridge, you need to hire workers, you need to buy materials to build the bridge. That means that you're like paying people, you're giving them jobs. They then have more money that they can go out and spend at local businesses. And all that spending plus the spending that you're doing to pay for materials and stuff gives those businesses a little bit more profit, which helps them hire more employees and creates like a positive cycle of supporting the economy and like helping things grow. So adding all those sort of details in the middle and explaining how we got from point A to point B is how you mechanize. I think it's quite a difficult thing to master, honestly. It's easy to learn, but hard to master. Because there are always more steps that you can add along the way to make things more persuasive. But basically when you're trying to mechanize during prep or even during your speech, you should be asking yourself like, okay, why does this happen? Why is this true? You know, what are the steps that lead me here? Someone asked about emphasizing and weighing impacts. I mean, I think that in terms of emphasizing impacts, honestly, some of the more sort of stylistic stuff we were talking about earlier can be quite helpful. So saying like, okay, this is going to be good for the economy. Maybe it's unclear how that's good. If I can then say like this creates jobs for people, it means they can be stably employed. They can feel like they can take pride in their work. They know they're getting a paycheck tomorrow. They know they can put food on the table for their family. They can reliably like take care of their children. They don't have to worry about what's going to happen to them at the end of the month when they can't pay their bills. They can afford to go on nice vacations. They can buy nutritious food for their children. All those kinds of things sort of describe why it's so good that we have like economic growth, because it's a little bit intangible. So I think using some of the sort of rhetoric to explain what you're saying and support some of those impacts and just kind of describe how they help people can be quite good in terms of emphasizing them. In terms of specifically weighing, there are a lot of like pretty common weighing metrics that you can use. So you can say, you know, this impacts more people. This, you know, this is going to like have a larger impact in terms of the scale or the magnitude of it. Maybe this is going to be more likely. So there are two possible outcomes, but mine's more likely to happen, so we should be more concerned about that. All sorts of metrics, but basically any reason why you would maybe prioritize one thing over another in your average life can be a valid weighing metric. The trick is just explaining that to the judge, so saying we should prioritize this over that for whatever reason, and then justifying why your reason is true. So we should prioritize like this over that because it impacts more people, and we should value like impacting more people because every person is like morally equally valuable. And so we think that if we can help the greatest number of people, that's also going to have the biggest impact on the world. Someone's asking what a criterion is. Sorry, that's a difficult thing to define. A criteria, I guess, is just like a measure or a metric to like measure something. So like criteria are like when you're getting graded at school and they say, we're going to grade you on your style, on your grammar, on your content. Those are all criteria for giving you that grade. Okay. Someone's also asking how to strongly prove your claims. I think this goes into mechanization. So ask yourself, like, why does this happen? What are the steps along the way? I think using examples can help to support things. So you can, think of like real world examples that maybe support whatever argument you're making, but even if you can't, you can often think of hypothetical situations that fit it quite well. So I'd encourage you to like look for some of those to support your claim. You never really need to have just one example. You can have two or you can have three. If you're struggling to fill your time and like cutting down material isn't a concern, then I would say anything you can think of that is going to support your argument is probably something you can use to make it a little bit stronger. If you are at the point where you're filling all your time, then you do want to be a little bit more strategic and maybe focus a little bit more on that mechanization as opposed to examples. But I think one or two examples never hurts, especially if you can be concise in terms of presenting them. In terms of how to build a case against your opponents, that's a bit of a broad question. I feel like that's difficult to maybe answer concisely. Is there a more precise skill that you're maybe looking to work on? Feel free to just put that in the chat. In the meantime, I am going to quickly just look at the workshop questions that we got on the Google forum and just see if there are any of those that people were looking for us to address. Okay, so I think that one of the things on the workshop question that people were asking about was how to deal with principled arguments. To answer this broadly, I think principled arguments are often quite difficult to weigh. But the way that you like prove a principle is usually by using like a thought experiment to sort of show that something appeals to our moral intuition. So it is wrong to prioritize money over human life. How do we know this? Well, if I'm wearing my favorite dress and I'm walking down the street and I see a child drowning, the morally correct thing to do would be for me to jump into the water and save that child, even if I ruin a very expensive piece of clothing. And so things like that, I think, can help to support your principled arguments, but they are often quite difficult to run generally, especially as like a beginner debater. So sometimes I think if you're choosing between a principle and a practical and you're not sure, if you could prove the principle, sometimes it might be the more strategic move to run the practical. Yeah, so someone's saying, I often struggle to make a unifying theme around my claims. They're just separate claims on their own. So I don't think that's necessarily a problem. Like generally you will have 2 or 3 distinct arguments in support of your case, and that's fine. The one thing is do just make sure they're principally consistent. So if you have an argument that says like, this is going to be really bad for the economy, or really good for the economy or whatever, and then opposition has an argument about the economy as well, often people will then just like refute without thinking about how that impacts their case. So you might say, actually, opposition's argument about the economy falls out of this debate because we should be caring more about like human life than the economy. And any impact on either side of the house is going to be really minimal, for example. This is good because it deals with opposition, but it also undermines your own case. And so when you do things like that, I think it's important to just bear in mind how your refutation is going to like impact your case holistically. And when you're in prep, if you are struggling to like unify your arguments, I don't think you need to feel like you need to only run one idea or one theme or whatever, but do just sort of, do an intuition check with your partner, take a look at your arguments and say, are these arguments that are going to contradict each other? Are there ways in which they're inconsistent? If so, can I fix this? Sometimes it's easy to do that. You just add like an even if. If not, then maybe pick the one that you think is stronger and run with that. But if there is no conflict and they're just different ideas, that's fine. Just make it clear, like we've got 3 separate reasons why this is a good idea. Sometimes that can even be a strength because it means if opposition refutes one of your arguments really well, but doesn't address the other 2, those 2 still stand as like reasons why you should be doing this. Okay, There were also questions. I think I've addressed mechanisms, as well as ideas. I think the biggest thing for coming up with ideas is really just getting more practice. Watching rounds on YouTube, I think, is really helpful for that. People had also asked about prep time. During prep time, I think you should really be spending a lot of time talking to your partner. A lot of people, when they're new to debate, I think spend the whole of prep time just like writing things down, and sometimes will barely communicate. That's not a very good way to prepare. You are basically going to do that the whole time during the debate anyways, because you don't get the chance to talk to your partner without like whispering or whatever. So prep time is really about coming up with good ideas. Even if you do maybe want to spend some time writing, try to save that for the very end. Spend the first minute or two like silently preparing, the next couple minutes discussing what you came up with your partner, talking about where you think the debate's likely to go, what the trade-offs are. And then you can sort of start refining your case. And then maybe 10 minutes into prep, you can start writing. But usually I think prep time should be almost exclusively about talking to your partner and very little about writing. And crucially, I think as well, don't write your speech word for word. That's pretty much always not going to be a good strategy, because even with 15 minutes of prep, you're probably not going to write 5 minutes of material, and you're going to really look like you're reading when you go into the tournament. I think a lot of people got used to like taking notes with the laptop or whatever with online debate, but usually that's not allowed in person. So get used to like preparing on paper. I think bullet point notes are going to be really helpful for that. And really focus on sort of talking through your ideas, thinking about things with your partner, as opposed to just preparing on your own and writing on your own. Last couple of things that people had asked about were how to prepare for a tournament without doing spars. So I think that spars are good. So if you can access those, definitely do that. If you are not able to do spars or you don't want to, like I was saying earlier, watching some debates on YouTube can be really helpful. There are lots of good educational resources posted there as well that can teach you about like, subject areas that maybe you struggle with. I think short little videos just explaining like, this is this country, this is how it works, or like this is this economic concept or whatever, can be really good in terms of giving you just like surface level knowledge that are useful for debating. So those are a couple of things you can do. You can also do drills on your own or with your partner. So give a prime minister speech, record it, listen back, send it to someone, give it again, but 1 minute shorter with the same ideas. Sometimes you can like find a debate on YouTube, give a prime minister speech on the same motion, and then watch like the YouTube debate and see how you compare, see what they did differently, think about, the strategy behind it, why they maybe made those choices. You and your partner can debate against each other. You can also debate against YouTube. So give a speech, listen to the YouTube speech, give a speech, listen to the YouTube speech. It's not going to be perfect because obviously they're not responding directly to your case. But I think it is often reasonably good, especially if you watch like a PM speech and then you guys pretend you're opening opposition. That's usually quite good. If you're struggling with back half, you can watch a front half of a debate on YouTube, like the OG and OO, and then, think about what you would run as an extension, prepare as if you were going to give that extension speech, give the extension speech, and then listen to the actual one on YouTube and see how that compares. You can also do like shorter drills. So, if you're struggling with mechanization, maybe just pick one argument, mechanize it as well as you can for 5 minutes. Don't run two. Like I was saying before, I think it can be fun to mechanize just like really silly arguments and try to be as good at that as you can be. You can try giving a speech, seeing how long you can go without saying words like or because obviously those are things that I think take up a lot of time in people's speeches. There are other ideas online, so lots of options there, but I think there are lots of sort of drills you can do with your partner or by yourself that will help you to improve, and lots of good resources online to help with that. And then somebody had asked in the chat, how do you sound fluent in your speeches? I think a lot of it comes with practice, but a few tips, like I said before, do some drills at home, practice sounding confident, speaking loudly, clearly. If you find like you trip over your words, then try to slow down a little bit. It sounds counterintuitive, but it will often help you to give a better, clearer speech. I think as well, not writing out every word that you say is going to help. If you do bullet points, it's going to be a lot easier for you to sort of jump fluently from one idea to the other. If you write out every single sentence that you want to say during prep, then that's going to eat up a lot of your time. And as soon as you run out of like pre-written sentences, you're going to struggle to fill up your time to know what to say. And it's going to be really obvious to the judge when you stop reading the thing that you wrote in advance. So break the habit of writing speeches word for word, do bullet points. I have some of my notes here. They're not incredibly good. But like usually this is kind of how I take my notes for tournaments. You can see like they're pretty vague. Like I definitely don't have full sentences written out there. When I'm judging, I sometimes will track a little bit more clearly. Like I will sort of write down more things, but this is it. Like this is 2 pages of notes for a like hour-long VP debate. So really just write down the important things. I think good note taking leads to good speeches and better judging. So if you do feel like you're struggling to get organized in your speeches, or you're tripping over your words or whatever, I think focus on your notes and hopefully the speeches will come later. Are there any questions or anything before we wrap it up? Hopefully I've answered most of them, but are there any other ones? How can I please more experienced partners? And what should I do if they refuse to provide feedback? So the thing is, I think that you shouldn't be aiming to like please a partner necessarily. I don't know if you were here when we were doing the main presentation, but you win or you lose as a team, generally. So I think that like, if you have a partner that's like blaming you for the loss, that's probably not going to be someone who's going to help you a lot with your development. Like I think that, especially if someone's doing like a pro-am with you or whatever, this is supposed to be a learning experience. They're supposed to be helping you. So if they're not helping you or refusing to help you, then I would maybe look for a different partner, someone who is willing to like give you some support. You can also though like ask judges or whatever for feedback, other debaters in the round. Sometimes if you have a person like in the debate room that you respect that was debating against you, sometimes they're going to be able to give you good advice as well. So don't limit yourself to just asking your partner for feedback, but also I think don't be intimidated by them. Like if you're dealing with a more experienced debater in prep, hopefully they'll kind of walk you